Another helpful scope for evaluating color in the frame is the vectorscope. The vectorscope reveals where colors in the frame are falling in the context of a color wheel. If we overlay the vectorscope on a color wheel, you'll see that 6 labeled squares correspond to the 6 primary and secondary colors: R for red, Y for yellow, G for green, C for cyan, B for blue, and M for magenta. If you're wondering why these squares, referred to as targets, are unevenly spaced from the center, it's because they correspond to the position that color bars should appear when viewed on the scopes. Back in the days of analog, the vectorscope was critical for calibrating and keeping consistency between video sources. Regardless of their historic origins, these target squares are still useful when you're learning the scopes to remind you which colors are represented where on the vectorscope. Equally, or arguably more useful, is a thin line passing between the red and yellow targets. This is another remnant of the analog video broadcast days and is the I-axis of the IQ color component system. Now, there's no need to get more technical here. We'll leave that to the TV engineers. But the important thing to know is that the line is still included for a specific reason. Balanced skin tone will invariably fall along this line. As a result, this line is sometimes mistakenly called the skin color indicator or skin tone line. Historically, that's not the reason it first appeared on the scope, but in modern workflows, that's effectively the role it plays. If your skin tones aren't lining up along the I-axis line, then they most likely have an unnatural cast that needs correcting. And this is true regardless of the race of your on-screen talent. Asian, Caucasian, African skin should all fall in close proximity to the I-axis. And it's not just skin colors that the I-axis is significant for. You'll find that natural colors tend to congregate here as well. So, if your colors are significantly shifted away from the axis, you probably have a color cast. As we flip through these images, watch how the vectorscope changes. The more saturated the image, the further to the edges of the scope they fall. Note also that in most of the images we have warm tones, and so the traces tend to congregate between the red and yellow targets of the scope. Unless this scene takes place in a candy store, most colors in your image will tend to be fairly desaturated. So, color correction software will typically provide a means to zoom the vectorscope up for better readability. In fact, that's the way we've been viewing the images so far. You can see this when we temporarily reset the zoom and set the traces back to their correct scale. Now that we've looked at the main scopes we'll be using for color correction, let's dive into the actual controls we'll use to perform the color correction.